begin to know the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Here's Jerry Seinfeld out in Gaza doing stand-up for the, what's the deal with all these tunnels? Usually tunnels because you want to go somewhere. These guys are just tunneling to another spot in Gaza. Where do they go? Hey, does your side suck too? I'm on the other side of the tunnel. Kind of sucks over here. And who would take a baby as a hostage? No one likes dealing with a baby. Can you imagine? Terrorist 2 in the morning? Who's feeding this baby? I can't do this. I have people I have to terrorize in the morning. Someone else is going to have to care for this baby. You know, they take you hostage, but then they have to care for you. It's not easy caring for someone you don't care for. They took you because they don't like you, but now they have to be nice to you. I'm getting more mixed signals from this terrorist guy. Like your divorced wife sending you hot nudes from your house. I'm totally losing it. Are we trying to hang her or what? You know, I'd like to see that tunnel.
So 1 in 4 Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip, over 570,000 people, are starving due to the Israeli siege. And this is based on a report using data from the UN and other aid agencies that was released on Thursday. So this report, published by the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, the IPC, said the Israeli onslaught in Gaza has caused catastrophic levels of acute food insecurity across the Gaza Strip. The IPC, they have a 5-phase scale for malnutrition, and the report estimates that the entire population of Gaza is facing phase 3 or higher. So phase 3 is already bad enough as it is. It is defined as households either having food consumption gaps that are reflected by high or above usual acute malnutrition, or are marginally able to meet minimum food needs, but only by depleting essential livelihood assets or through crisis coping strategies. So basically saying food is hard to come by and there is some malnutrition as it is. And that's what they're saying the entire population of Gaza is facing. And it says 1 in 4 households in Gaza are at phase 5. And that means catastrophic famine-like conditions. Phase 5 is defined as, and I'll read the quote from, this is how they define this. Quote, households have an extreme lack of food and or other basic needs, even after full employment of coping strategies. Starvation, death, destitution, and extremely critical acute malnutrition levels are evident. For famine classification, the area needs to have extreme critical levels of acute malnutrition and mortality, end quote. So they're saying a quarter of the population is facing famine, is basically what they're saying. So the UN Security Council again pushed back a vote on a Gaza resolution that was initially scheduled to be brought forward for a vote on Monday. The vote is now scheduled for Friday and was delayed throughout the week due to the threat of a U.S. veto. The U.S. worked to water down the resolution and remove a call for the cessation of hostilities. According to AFP, after negotiators worked on Thursday, the latest draft version of the resolution calls for creating the conditions for a sustainable cessation of hostilities. So it calls for the creating of the conditions. It doesn't call for a ceasefire, doesn't call for a cessation of hostilities. So the U.S. got that taken out of it. And another major sticking point about the resolution, which was put forward by the UAE, was a call to give the UN exclusive control of inspections of humanitarian aid before it enters Gaza. And that's something that the US and Israel rejected. According to the Washington Post, the UN also wanted more flexible language on that issue, and that this new draft that was circulated on Thursday satisfied at least some of the US concerns with that issue. Enough so that the U.S. plans to abstain from voting for the resolution. They're not going to vote for it, but they're not going to veto it. The Senate adjourned for the holidays on Wednesday without reaching a deal on Ukraine aid and will not return to Washington until January 8th. The Senate was initially due to break for holiday recess at the end of last week, but Majority Leader Chuck Schumer had senators return on Monday to try and reach a border deal to unlock the massive $111 billion spending package that includes military aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Republicans want significant changes to asylum and immigration laws to restrict the flow of migrants entering the country before approving the foreign military aid package, which includes over $60 billion to fund the Ukraine war for another year. The White House has indicated that it's willing to support new immigration restrictions, but it's unclear when an agreement will be made. According to The Hill, a group of Senate and White House negotiators have agreed to hold a virtual meeting over Christmas and New Year's break, but no votes will happen until next year. House Speaker Mike Johnson adjourned his chamber last week. Johnson and other Republican leadership have made clear that they will support the foreign military aid package once the Democrats make enough concessions on border policy. But we just don't know when this deal is going to happen.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
The national median existing home price rose 4% in November from a year earlier to $387,600, according to the National Association of Realtors. 387. There's no inflation. Fuck off. Inflation's taken care of. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Everything's fine. Who can afford that? You got a job at Target? No, I work at Starbucks. I'm a barrister. How about a coffee jerk? When I was a kid, I worked in a soda fountain. They call us soda jerks. No, I was a soda barrister. They give you those names because they treat you like shit and pay you crap. So they build you up with a name. You're a barrister, a barista, or whatever the fuck they call it. Yep. What else? You ready? Small U.S. banks are increasingly at risk in commercial property slump. Holy shit, blow me away. Wow, big story on Bloomberg yesterday. We warned about this over 3 years. It's your office building bust. This thing is going to be very serious. And you better get ready for your top trends of 2024. They're going to be out in 2 weeks. And one of them is going to be relating to this. About 14% of all commercial real estate loans and 44% of loans on office buildings appear to be in negative equity. Why? You're selling fear and hysteria. Everything is just fine. You only have an office occupancy rate of 50%, according to Castle Systems. Depending on whose numbers you're looking at office vacancy rates anywhere between vacant, nobody in there, boop, zero, nada. In the United States, between 14 and 20%. U.S. banks held about $2.7 trillion in commercial real estate debt at the end of the third quarter, according to the University of California. Commercial property values down 22%. Everything's fine. Keep playing those markets. Step right up, step right up. You ready? Container rates hit $10,000 as ocean freight inflation soars in Red Sea crisis. Yeah, the Houthis are bombing ships going out because the Houthis have been slaughtered. Everybody forgets this shit. By that arrogant Nobel Peace of Crap Prize winner, Barack Obama. Yep. And he sent over to Anthony Blinken. I'm Anthony Blinken. I went to Dalton. I went to Harvard. My daddy was an ambassador. My uncle was an ambassador. And I'm going to Saudi Arabia to give them strategic intelligence so they can keep slaughtering more Yemenis. Oh, you don't know about that. That only happened a couple of years ago. So this is serious. They're tired of getting slaughtered. Again, wait till you see some of your top trends of 2024 because it relates to this. More than 100,000 workers at U.S.-based tech companies have been laid off in mass job cuts this year. No shit. In your Trends Journal, this is our 65th week of listing job cuts. This is serious, and it's going to get a lot worse in the new year. Look what Drudge puts up. Prague gunman kills 14 in student terror at UNI. Murdered his own dad. Rampage rocks Europe. Not one article in the Drudge Report about the Israel war and the slaughter of over 20,000 Palestinians. Oh, this guy killed 14 people and his dad. Oh, in all of Europe. Oh my God. That's the shit they shovel down your throat. How about the 70% of those dead over there being women and children? Now, who cares? They're only Palestinians. Oh, but in Prague, that's big fucking news. This is the shit they're shoveling down your throat. They're shit dealers. You go to the Cartoon News Network, CNN, the big story. This victim on the Green River killer now has a name. Authorities, a bunch of fucking shit. I'm an authority. You're just a piece of crap. I'm an authority. Authorities say they identified remains belonging to a teenager who ran away from a family's home in 1992. What the fuck do I care? Not a word, not one word on the whole front page of the Cartoon News Network about the slaughter, the genocide that Israel is committing against the Palestinians. So I encourage you to visit trendsjournal.com because we're giving you what nobody else is. So support us. We're supporting you. And don't forget, Salenti and the Judge, a great interview I did with Judge Napolitano yesterday.
From Cam C. Will corrupt politicians and officials ever be held accountable for war crimes and crimes against humanity they are guilty of committing? Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and yours. God bless. Merry Christmas to you as well, Cam C. I don't think so. I don't think that Prime Minister Netanyahu will be held accountable for the war crimes he's committing, and he's committing thousands of them. If you watched Professor Mearsheimer on this program yesterday, and if you watch Max Blumenthal at 5:15 this afternoon here, you will see that the numbers of murdered innocents are staggering. 20,000 Palestinians murdered, about 16,000 of them women and children. 14,000 women and children. The remaining 6,000, about 2/3 innocent males, and maybe the remaining 2,000 Hamas fighters. So the death and destruction, the torment, the denial of food, shelter, clothing, heat, medical supplies is catastrophic and overwhelming. And so there's no dispute but that this is a war crime. The question is, will Netanyahu be prosecuted? Will Joe Biden be prosecuted for facilitating this? Will Tony Blinken be prosecuted? Lloyd Austin be prosecuted? No, and no. Because the American government controls here we go again, levers of power at the courts that do these prosecutions. It's usually only low-level people that you never heard of who are prosecuted for some sort of a war crime, and sometimes they're convicted and sometimes they're acquitted. Very sad. Question, Judge, I believe NATO is an outdated and unnecessary entity which should have been dismantled when the Soviet Union dissolved in 1791. Who or what decides the existence of NATO? Let me say first, I agree with you. Donald Trump said he agreed with you, but he didn't follow through on withdrawing us. There are two ways that we can withdraw from a treaty. One is for the president just to say, I'm not going to honor it again. And that's wrong, and it's unconstitutional, but presidents have gotten away with it. George W. Bush did that to the ABM Treaty. The ABM Treaty, Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, was a great treaty. It stopped the Russians, and it stopped the Americans from the arms race. Once Bush decided he didn't want to follow it, the arms race heated up again. The other way is for a formal rescission of the treaty, and that would require a 2/3 vote of the Senate. Presidents don't do that because they don't want to take the time and the effort and the political effort to persuade 2/3 of the Senate. Remember how a treaty comes about. President proposes, 2/3 of the Senate ratifies. It doesn't go to the House. It is a rare thing in American law that is only passed by one House. And where does it rank in American law? Equal to the Constitution. Also, Grassy Knoll, Judge, in your opinion, when was the last time we had a government that upheld the Constitution? Probably Thomas Jefferson, although I'm not so sure that the Louisiana Purchase was consistent with the Constitution, which tripled the size of the United States when Jefferson sent 15 million in cash to Napoleon, who desperately needed it to continue fighting the Napoleonic Wars. And as a result, he got everything from Ohio to Minnesota and all the way down to Louisiana. The last president that I know of who vetoed legislation because it was unconstitutional and stated so was Calvin Coolidge, a president who actually hated the presidency and hated being in the White House. But if you heard the conversation I just had with Gary Barnett, you've heard me say this, and I'll repeat it. You may have heard me say it before. Formally, we still have a constitution. Basically, we still have a president, we still have a federal judiciary, we still have a Congress, we still have two houses in the Congress. The House of Representatives sits for 2 years, the Senate sits for 6 years. But functionally, we don't have a constitution anymore at all, because the purpose of the Constitution was twofold: to constitute, to establish the federal government, and to restrain the federal government. So as an instrument of restraint, the Constitution has failed miserably. The federal government's powers are radically out of proportion to what's written down in the Constitution. So the federal government bribes the states with cash, the rich with bailouts, the middle class with tax cuts, the poor with wealth distribution. And as long as it keeps engaging in that bribery, it will stay in power. But one day, enough people will say, enough is enough. We're not listening. We're not paying attention. We're leaving the government. I hope I'm around when that happens. Vlad Freeman, question. How does a state succeed? By bribery. By bribery is how the states succeed. What is the state? Lowercase s. It is that which has a monopoly of force in a given geographic area. Try and hire your own police department. Forget about it. You and they will all be arrested. You will obey the government that has the monopoly on force in your area. That is, of course, the attitude of the state. Government is force. The state is force. It is not logic. It is not reason. It is not morality. It is force. Until we recognize that and until we starve it to death so it can't pay for the force that keeps it in power, it'll keep its thumb on us. I think we'll do one more and then I'll rest my voice. Mark Brown. Hi, Judge. How does the U.S. administration sleep at night after it vetoes the ending of an ongoing genocide? They are cold, calculating killers who perpetuate genocide and who refuse to stop it. And they don't have consciences. And that's how they sleep at night.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network.
I consider Glenn Greenwald and Tucker Carlson both to be great men. I have enormous respect for both of them. I think their work is nothing short of heroic. They are two of the loudest and most intelligent anti-war voices in the country. They're great on so many things. Libertarian economics is not one of them. So let's play the clip and we will respond.
I think a lot of people have awakened to the now demonstrable fact that libertarian economics was a scam perpetrated by the beneficiaries of the economic system that they were defending. So they created this whole intellectual framework to justify the private equity culture that's hollowed out the country. That's my personal view, and I've seen it up close my whole life. So I think it's a fair assessment.
All right, so let's pause it there. The whole deal here is that the federal government of the United States of America is the biggest institution in the history of the world. And they suck out $6 trillion every year from the economy and pass it out to the politically connected. And the Federal Reserve at the same time is totally debasing the currency. And then for years has had these insane artificially low interest rates. Even today, the interest rates are crazy artificially low, even though after these raises. And this allows for what? An economy based around speculation. And none of this is true laissez-faire capitalism or anything even remotely close. We don't live under anything remotely close to libertarian economics. And so to take this current, it's this thing that libertarians always have to deal with, right? Like we are simultaneously criticized for being like, oh, you guys are these ideologues who can't convince the rest of Americans that, your ideas are worth getting on board on. And that's why you have no real political power. I mean, what real political power do libertarians have? What we got Rand Paul and Thomas Massey. And on a good day, Mike Lee. Who else do we got? Maybe you can put together like 5 other, decent people in the House of Representatives. You can't really find me another senator. But that's it. So it's like, oh, look, you guys have no real political power. And also you're responsible for every failure of the system. Even though you have no political power and we won't try any of your policies out, you're also responsible for what's going on now. It's kind of unfair that someone who is a banker, they get to claim, oh, they don't have income, but because they make all of their income from investments. And so they're paying like a 15% tax rate while somebody who just works might be paying double that, maybe more. And you're like, okay, that's true. Right? That's true. There's an unfairness to that. But this is where being precise really matters because you see immediately, right? There's kind of 2 options of how you could fix that problem, right? Like if you're saying it's unfair that investment banker pays 15% and electrician pays 35%. Okay, that's unfair. So how do we fix that? Well, there's one of 2 ways. Okay? You either raise investment bankers' taxes or you lower electricians' taxes. Some combination of both, I guess, but those are basically your options. But so now think this through for a little bit. Let's say we raise the investment bankers' taxes to 35%. Okay, we make capital gains 35%. Well, now we don't have the problem of the unfairness anymore, right? They're both paying 35% for the sake of argument. Okay, now was that electrician helped at all? Okay, here's what you get. There's going to be a little bit more revenue going to Joe Biden's federal government. What are they going to do? Well, they're going to take in that revenue. Actually, the extra money that is coming in has already been spent and 1,000 times over, right? We're already spending way more money than we bring in through taxes, and we do it by borrowing or just printing the money. We also got tens of trillions of dollars in unfunded liabilities for entitlement programs. So, this money just basically evaporates into the swamp of DC. So, do you really think that this guy's life would be better off if the swamp had a little bit more money, if they brought a little bit more revenue? And let's assume, by the way, that they actually get more revenue, because as you know, raising rates doesn't always equate to more revenue coming in, but whatever. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, the DC swamp gets a little bit more money. Is that going to help this guy's life? I mean, if money going to the federal government were helping people's lives, this guy would be fine already, right? Because there's already $6 trillion being spent in Washington, D.C. every year. So as Tucker said, let's look at our current economic system, whatever you want to call it. Let's judge it by how it works for people. All right, fair game. Let's do that. How is that helping this guy at all? Now, let's look at the other option. We could lower this guy's taxes from 35% to 15%. Has that helped him? It's life-changing. His life is already so much tangibly better because we did that, right? That guy is now, just anybody out there who's working full-time, who's paying, let's say, 30-something% in tax. If your taxes got lowered this year to 15%, you would be so excited at the prospect of that, because it would make your life so much materially better immediately. So see, that's why being precise matters, because you're going to get to one of two solutions here, one of which will do nothing to improve anybody's life, and one of which will actually help the people who you're claiming to want to help so much.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
The problem is, it looks like Republicans, like the Republican base, doesn't really seem to have much interest in issues like this. They say they do, but I don't think they do. The general public, I don't think they do. For example, the Tea Party was a brief flash in the pan, but even were they willing to make the kinds of cuts that would be necessary? I highly doubt it. So unfortunately, you're making your stand on maybe the most unpopular thing of all. I mean, it's easy to go after, woke leftists or Antifa criminals or whatever, because everybody understands how crazy that is. But people like getting checks in the mail with their names on them. And that is a very, very hard addiction to break.
I agree with you. And the worst episode of that was, with the so-called stimmies in response to the lockdown, in which everyone got a check except maybe the top 10% of the households. If you were a family of four with two wage earners who got laid off, you got all the stimmy checks, the child care credits. You were also eligible for the unemployment topper on top of, which was $1,000 a week, on top of the state benefits. It could add up to 30, 40, even 50,000 a year of handouts from the government. That happened on Trump's watch. He signed it. It was, the worst excess of that thing that we've encountered yet. And it's another reason why I think he's already proved he's not even remotely the right person for the job. This is important because his term began in 2017 after we were well into the business cycle recovery after the Great Recession. And, even, sort of conservative / Keynesian Friedmanites that had dominated the Republican Party always believed that when you got into the middle and back end of the business cycle, it was time to sober up. You needed to get back to, market rates of interest. You needed to get the budget balanced or even in surplus. Trump went the other way. When they tried, as you remember, belatedly to begin raising interest rates, and then they went into QT in 2018 and 2019, Trump was all over the case of the Fed and blaming them for even, trying to get interest rates within the range of something that was meaningful in real terms after inflation. So that's why I think, the indictment is so strong. It came at the wrong time, and it was really the wrong message, utterly wrong. As I say in the book, I think that he was more, irresponsible, reckless on monetary policy than, William Jennings Bryan or Wright Patman or any other monetary quacks who've made their way across the scene in American economic history recently. So again, we can't have someone back in the Oval Office who's going to be on the Fed's case, to ease money, to lower interest rates, to buy in the federal debt, which is exactly what I think predictably he would do if he gets a second term.
I think the thing that bothers me the most is you have a passage in the book quoting Trump on his opinions on monetary policy. Now, there are some things I am later on, David, so mentally prepare yourself. I am later on going to ask you to name me a couple of good things about Trump, okay? So get those wheels turning, okay?
Yeah.
But But on things like this, any sensible person at all just has to shake his head, because he would say things like he speaks as if there is no downside to lowering interest rates. Of course, we all like low interest rates, and so the only obstacle is a lack of political will or dummies on the Federal Reserve Board or whatever. Like, there are no economic consequences. There's no meaning to interest rates. They can just be arbitrarily set wherever we like. You wouldn't even pause to wonder. It seems like there is absolutely no reason not to do this, but there must be some. I wonder what it is.
Well, it's obvious that market-set interest rates are what allocates capital, what allocates economic activity. If we've known for decades and decades and decades, the price system is fundamental to capitalist prosperity. And if we don't have, at least reasonably honest quasi-market prices in the financial system, we're going to end up with the mess we have today, huge financial bubbles. We're going to be sending the wrong message to Capitol Hill. In other words, the federal debt doesn't matter because the carry cost actually of the debt, when the Fed finally had the interest rates down to rock bottom, averaged 1.6%. Well, the politicians aren't going to worry about the cost of financing the debt and the carry cost of the debt if you drive the weighted average cost of the 34 trillion federal debt to almost a rounding error. So that's the problem. Is if you want to turn Wall Street into a speculative casino, and if you want to turn Washington into a runaway spending machine, then artificially depress interest rates to non-economic levels.
You run your mouth and I run my business, brother. You tell everybody I'm busted. You talk so much you got me disgusted. But you run your mouth and I run my business, brother.
Remember when they were talking about, hey, we got to go blow up that hospital because that hospital is the main artery. It's the main base. There was a lot of conversation about how important of a strategic asset the hospital was. And then Dave pointed out on the Part of the Problem podcast that the tunnel that they knew existed there was apparently because Israel had built that tunnel. And then I was like, yeah, and they also just found like a couple guns. Like, I'm not saying Hamas wasn't there, but was that a main place for Hamas? Was that actually the main artery, the main command center? Definitely made you think, like when you saw those movies and the Terminators have taken over the entire world and you got the one underground base left that they're making all the decisions from. They really made it seem like it was that, which it's appeared to not have been. And then afterwards, they're pointing at random shreds of evidence, like when you were a dumb second grader and you're walking around picking up a trash can and saying, hey, this is a clue for what mystery? I don't know. You and your other kid have an imagination. You're being a bunch of idiots. And that's basically the strategy that they took of just picking up random, oh, look, there's a curtain here, clearly, and then look, a single gun, and look at this. So that was the way I looked at it. I was like, man, Israel really walked back that story of being the absolute main, the main thing. And so here you go. This is from, this was actually from the Week magazine summarizing the Washington Post report. Scant evidence of Hamas presence at a hospital. A Washington Post analysis published Thursday concluded the evidence provided by the Israeli government falls short of proving that Hamas was running a command and control center at Gaza City Al-Shifa Hospital. Before and after Israeli forces stormed the complex on November 15th, Israeli Defense Forces officials said they had concrete evidence that Hamas was operating in tunnels and bunkers under the medical complex, the Palestinians' enclave's largest. Terrorists came here to command their operations, Israel Defense spokesperson Daniel Hagari said on November 22nd, but the Post reported that the rooms connected to a tunnel the IDF found showed no sign of military activity, and none of the 5 hospital buildings Hagari pointed to had access to tunnels. So, at least thus far, that absolutely need to go into that hospital because it was a main base, at least thus far, appears to be disproven. Now, this was an even more damning article from the New York Times. And now, once again, every other topic, I see things from the New York Times, and I can usually tell you exactly whether they're lying to you. On this one, I'm just telling you what's being reported. This was a Times investigation tracked Israel's use of its most destructive bombs in South Gaza. And this is above the picture. Visual evidence shows Israel dropped 2,000-pound bombs where it ordered Gaza civilians to move for safety. So they told people to go to specific areas, and then they were dropping 2,000-pound bombs on those areas. During the first 6 weeks of the war in Gaza, Israel routinely used one of its biggest and most restrictive bombs in areas it designated safe for civilians. And so Israel, in response to this, in response to questions about the bomb use in South Gaza, an Israeli military spokesperson said in a statement to the Times that Israel's priority was destroying Hamas, and questions of this kind will be looked into at a later stage. So what does that mean? It's if you guys are dropping bombs on civilians in the areas that you're telling them that you have to go to, you're telling me that doesn't sound like enough that you should probably act on it now? Yeah, we're going to deal with this stuff later. We've got more important things to do, like bombing more civilians. And then he said, the spokesperson also said that the IDF takes feasible precautions to mitigate civilian harm. Safe and effective. Well, I write to you, yeah, okay, that sounds like you guys have actual... It sounds like you caught us red-handed, but, we're doing everything we can, and, we're going to continue what we're doing, and we'll answer these questions later. The reason I guess I point out these articles is that, to me, you can be pro-Israel, And, you know, I'm not, dude, I like the country. I visited the country. I'd like to go back to the country. I think at this point, they got to contend with the fact that it doesn't matter what happened in the past. People are both there. They're going to have to figure out how to live with each other. You can be pro the state of Israel, and you can think that the state of Israel has a right to exist, and you can think that they even have a right to defend themselves. But I think you can also, any reasonable person can read shit like this and just go, what they're doing is unacceptable. And I think anyone who's not willing to do that is actually at this point not contending with reality. This is from the Associate Press. The White House criticized the flight and accused Abbott of using migrants for politics. Yet again, Governor Abbott is showing how little regard or respect he has for human beings. White House spokesperson Angelo Fernandez, that's really the guy's name, said in a statement, this latest political stunt just adds to the tally of extreme policies which seek to demonize and dehumanize people. And what is your border policy? What does that do for people? It's like, yeah, when you compare fantasy to reality, fantasy looks a lot better. If you want to pretend that we have unlimited resources and that anyone can come into the country and we've got a warm bed for them, fresh soup, a job, and that they're not going to be taking anything from anybody else, well then why are you, if that actually is an achievable goal, why not just let everyone into the country? Why aren't you out there going to the deepest corners and the most third world backwards places and letting people know you don't have to be sitting in this trash pit? Take my hand. I can bring you to this place called America that has unlimited resources and can provide for anybody. It's very easy if you're comparing reality to fantasy to go, hey, how dare you expose reality? Reality's grim. Reality, there's going to be people who die alone. There's going to be people who have cancer. There's going to, yes, there are grim aspects to reality. And guess what? If you're going to shame people for actually letting people know what reality is, living in the fantasy does not help. It's like when it's a delusional person who doesn't realize that their addiction's a problem. And at some point they have to actually contend with reality. And if you're the enabler stepping in and going, hey, don't let that person know that he's an addict. Don't let him know that he ruined the whole family, that he spent all of his money and that he's going to be dead in 2 years. And, you know, the people that relied upon him are going to always hold, don't tell him that this is dehumanizing. You're dehumanizing this individual by pointing out what reality actually is.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold.
But what we talked a lot about was the color revolutions and how the State Department, through the National Endowment for Democracy and all these other, NGO organizations, have been responsible for promoting and ultimately directing, to a certain extent, revolutions throughout the rest of the world. And I genuinely believe, and I can only say this because I'm suspended on YouTube for a couple more days, and as soon as I'm back over there, I'll stop saying it. But I genuinely believe that we are living through a color revolution. That the CIA, in tandem, potentially, with the CCP, are working feverishly to get you and I at the throats of our neighbors so that they can implement whatever totalitarian plans they have. Central bank digital currency, full surveillance, full biometric data hacking, all this shit, right? I really think that's the play. That's the play. And to a certain extent, I think that Donald Trump is just a tool being used in that process. He is almost certainly an unwitting participant, but that's my honest opinion as to what we're up against, and it's going to get wild. I am almost always kind to Tucker Carlson. This is a rare moment where I'm going to be very, very critical. He was on with Glenn Greenwald over the past week, and they were talking economics, and I was none too pleased with his assessment. Now, I'm not a hater. As you know, I praise Tucker constantly. Big fan of his, actually. But when it comes to economics, the man does not know what he's talking about.
I think a smarter way to assess an economic system is by its results. So you can assign whatever name you want to the economic system of the United States. You could call it market capitalism. You could call it, you could call it a whole host of different things. But I don't think any of that's useful. Those are boring conversations. I think you need to ask, does this economic system produce a lot of dollar stores? And if it does, it's not a system that you want because it degrades people and it makes their lives worse and it increases exponentially the amount of ugliness in your society. And anything that increases ugliness is evil.
That you're having an increase in these very cheap retail stores is not so much that we have a libertarian economic order, but rather because we have a centrally planned economy, which is creating inflation through the Federal Reserve and through the Treasury, but also just kind of broadly diminishing our existence, our income levels, our standard of living. These are a product of a crony capitalist fascistic model that also has a central bank, which is rapidly deteriorating the purchasing power of the dollar. And I think anybody that has any grasp of economics can make that argument very succinctly. And I don't understand why Tucker, being a guy who I find to be quite intelligent, would be this off base. But
they're there. So if it's such a good system, why do we have all these dollar stores? Dollar store is the clear, I mean, it's not the only ugly thing being created in the United States, but it's one of the most common, and it's certainly the most obvious. So if you...
Let me answer that. The reason that we have more and more dollar stores is because more and more people are barely hanging on, largely because of Donald Trump, who permitted for the economy to be destroyed in the last year of his presidency, but also obviously the central bankers, Congress, who passed these multi-trillion-dollar bills, things that we never would have imagined possible in all of American history, and they happened repeatedly over the past 4 years. So this is the reason that people are they're struggling. They're suffering. The reason that they're suffering, though, is not because of a libertarian economic order, but rather because of a centrally planned economy with a central bank that also is diminishing the purchasing power of the dollar.
You have a dollar store, you're degraded. And any town that has a dollar store does not get better, it gets worse. And the people who live there lead lives that are worse. So, and the counter argument to the extent there is one, oh, they buy cheaper stuff. Great. But they become more unhappy. And the dollar store itself is a sort of symbol. It's a physical thing. It's a real thing. It's not just a metaphor, but it's also a metaphor for your total lack of control over where you live and over the imposition of aggressively in-your-face ugly structures that send one message to you, which is you mean nothing. You are a consumer, not a human being or a citizen. And so, again, I don't know what we call our current system, but its effects are grotesque. They're grotesque. It's wrecked. I've been here 54 years and I watch carefully. That's my only gift, is I watch.
See, this is the issue, is that he then says he doesn't know what you call it. Well, then don't call it a libertarian economic order, because it's not one. It's not even close to one. It's almost 180 degrees away from what a libertarian would prescribe to remedy some of these very legitimate issues that you're pointing out. But the problem is that he called the 99-cent stores or the dollar stores a symbol. What they are is a symptom. He's very close, but he gave it the wrong label. It is a symptom of the disease. The disease is inflation. The disease is fascism. It is cronyism. It is inflation. It is central banking. These are the dollar stores and Walmart's success, and all of these other companies that have blossomed during this period, including Amazon, are a product, or rather a symptom of the disease. The disease is not libertarian capitalism. The disease is actually moving away from capitalism into a more totalitarian economic framework.
You know, the Fed manipulates and pretend they know how to manage monetary policy, and it's exactly opposite of what sound money would be like, because the market dictates what the interest rates would be, the saving rates, and all these things. But when you manage the whole economy, and they are the central economic planners, the Federal Reserve, and they want to say they're independent, and that's why they don't want anybody to have an audit of it. They want to be independent because they have to take care of the welfare state, because if they're spending money, the Fed has to accommodate. And also for the same reason they have to accommodate those in the military-industrial complex. Oh, that's for national security, which is a bunch of baloney, because it doesn't help it. It undermines our national security when we get ourselves involved in wars around the world and have troops in 150 countries and all this. So that's a fallacy. But the main daily tool that they use, and what just happened recently on this announcement that the Fed is pivoting, which means is they're going to keep interest rates low and get them lower. And that's why everybody's euphoric, and therefore interest rates being down, the people who are in the daily trading said, oh, well, if interest rates are going down, I'm going to get out of saving the money. And for this day, at least, it looks like they decided to buy the gold. But if it's a day where they recognize maybe in a month or so interest rates are really going up, they'll be back. And the gold prices are inevitably going to keep going up because of the function of our government, which is to spend, borrow, and there's not enough people who want to loan the money, so the Fed has to print the money, and that's where the problem is. But the Fed is obsessed with their expertise in managing the economy, and the magic number for the Fed now for many years, at least a decade, they've emphasized it, is if we if we could just get it where we destroy the value of the dollar at 2% a year. Boy, that would be wonderful. That means they're going to steal 2%. What if we put your money in the bank and say, okay, yeah, you can use my money, but the bank tells you, yes, but it's going to be worth the last 2% if you keep it in the bank. Well, they did this and thinking 2% was a wonderful solution. So one time, not too long ago, the market was dictating and what the Fed was doing. They took it because the Fed was hysterical. They took interest rates down below zero, which was crazy and historic. So they worked hard. We got to calm the markets down because they think things are being distorted with negative interest rates. So they kept pestering, we got to get this inflation up to 2%, 2%. And my prediction then was, it'll get to 2%, then it's going to get a lot higher. And that's exactly what happened. The distortions of this interest rate thing will continue, and it's going to get worse. But for right now, today, the target is approaching, and it's just about ready to make the final announcement. We have conquered inflation. And as you would guess, Chris, I don't believe that.
No way. And you're right, and the government has proven that they are full throttle until they destroy everything. And but if that's the way it's going to be, then so be it. Then what has to happen is, when that happens, there has to be enough people that want to do the right thing once they destroy the currency, whenever that happens to be. And it doesn't have to be a majority of people, not even close. Most people follow. So you don't need the majority. You just need enough people that understand, and if the more influential they are, the better, to understand sound money, and have influential people say, this is the way we have to go now. They destroyed everything, now we have to go this way. And sound money means what we have in the Constitution. What we have today is unconstitutional. They don't have the right to counterfeit, but they just ignore the Constitution and do it. So that's what we need, is money that cannot be counterfeited. And that's why we talk about gold on the show, because it cannot be counterfeited. That's why governments for hundreds of years tried to eliminate gold out of the consciousness of people, because they can't counterfeit it. And let's say you have that sound money again. The biggest plus that it would do is with war, because war is what is bringing our country down. It has totally bled us dry. Our military-industrial complex empire, they take money so easily. Just say the words national security and that's it. And that would change, because the politicians would have to ask us for money to fight wars. They would have to say, we want to fight this war, and we would have to agree to it. Today, they don't care what we think. They tell us the next war that they're going to fight. So, and they wouldn't be able to promise all this free stuff because they can't counterfeit the money. And we would only go to war when we actually feel like we have to defend ourselves, which is so rare that we wouldn't have to worry about war in a sense that we do today, where it's just bleeding us dry. And none of this would create a paradise here, because there would still be theft, there would still be crimes, there would still be sin. There's no system that we can make. The only thing we can do is better or worse, better or worse. Sound money is much, much better than this disaster that we're living through now, that we're waiting, to finally get rid of it. So that's the way we want to go. How things play out is still a mystery.
In spite of it all, I think the Merry Christmas that I have it's not that difficult to understand. It's not that difficult. Most people know. Think of it in terms of the individual. The individual knows they can't borrow $1 million every month and live beyond their means. Eventually, the banker calls the debt due. That's what happens in a nation. The debt is called in, and it's done by the money losing value, and that's what's going to happen. So I think that knowing that and knowing what to do, if we did it, that would be a Merry Christmas. And we feel very often during the year that we do reach some people, and that's why we're so delighted to present our case to our viewers and our supporters, because that is what it counts, and spreading the message is very key. So I hope everybody has a Merry Christmas and spread the message of liberty. Thank you for tuning in today, and please return soon.